This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Matilli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea unveils its biggest technology push yet, a plan with hundreds of billions of dollars, backed by Samsung and SK Hynix to sharpen its competitive edge in a fast-moving era of artificial intelligence. Now, EU and Chinese trade chiefs are set to wrangle over measures proposed by Brussels to reduce a $400 billion trade deficit with the world's second biggest economy. China again tightens export controls, this time targeting 20 more Japanese organizations, saying the move is needed to counter what it calls Japan's growing militarization. And Beijing warns Canberra against geopolitical games after Australia and Vanuatu signed a security pact banning foreign military bases in the Pacific island nation. Also ahead, China's low-cost structure has made it a manufacturing powerhouse. Now, artificial intelligence is redefining its comparative advantage. We explore the technologies transforming the next generation of supply chains. South Korea rolls out sweeping chip and AI mega projects, marking President Lee Jae-myung's boldest push yet to align AI and chip ambitions with his pledge to narrow regional disparities and revive economies beyond the Seoul metropolitan area. While media reports put the total planned investments at close to $1.2 trillion over several years. Now, in the key announcements so far, DRAM production capacity in the Seoul metropolitan area would be doubled over the next 5 years. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix plan to invest $518 billion to build 4 fabrication plants in the southwest region. Both firms will also invest more than $52 billion to establish high-bandwidth memory packaging facilities in the Chungcheong region. South Korea plans to spend $19.5 billion over the next 15 years to develop next-generation memory technologies, and also nearly $650 billion in AI data centers over the next decade. It also aims to build additional AI data centers with a capacity of 10 gigawatts, bringing the total capacity to 18.4 gigawatts. Now, the announcements are part of an agenda for industrial development in regions outside the capital, Seoul. President Lee also stressed the need for more balanced regional development and said that there would be a new office to oversee these projects.
청와대 안에 이 사업에 대한 직접 직할 담당관을 두고 이 3대 메가 프로젝트를 제가 직접 챙기고 신속하게 집행하도록 하겠습니다. 여기 모인 모두가 원팀이 돼서 대한민국의 새로운 대도약을 이끌어낼 수 있도록 건설적인 그리고 희망적인 발표와 토론이 기대됩니다.
Well, lots to unpack here, but for a deeper dive, let's bring in Olivia. So, Liv, South Korea, well, they have certainly been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the whole AI boom. But let's just say if spending actually starts to cool, the question is, could it also then become, one of the first markets to actually feel the impact?
Well, it is kind of a trade-off, Otelli. So we've heard earlier from President Lee Jae-myung, from the government's point of view, over the next 5 years, they really want to crank up and double the production of DRAM. That's a kind of memory chip very key to AI data center. So more DRAM means more capacity to support AI supercomputing. And from the business level, we've heard Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, they also have big plans. They want to expand their chip manufacturing, their advanced memory chip packaging facilities, among others. So we see a huge emphasis on AI and a concerted effort, a consolidated effort to secure and to advance South Korea's leadership across the AI supply chain. And what's significant from today's announcement, Otelli, is the timing. It has become so relevant and so timely because everyone starts to realize how much South Korea is one of the biggest beneficiaries. It has benefited so much from the global AI spending. SK Hynix and Samsung both produce the kind of advanced memory chip used in all AI data centers across the globe, and that has fueled spending. It fueled strong earnings and also lifted stock markets in the country. But it comes with a caveat. it also left South Korea more exposed if the pace of AI spending and investment starts to slow down sometime in the future.
So let's just say, if South Korea's fortunes are increasingly tied to this whole AI boom, what should investors be watching most closely for?
Well, first of all, there's been growing concerns over whether today's AI boom is becoming a bubble. Ironically, the first warning sign may not come from South Korea at all. And yes, Samsung and SK Hynix have been major winners from the AI boom, but their fortunes ultimately depend on the world's biggest AI spenders, the biggest names in AI in the world continuing to buy their chips. So investors should be watching closely, not just the Korean chip makers, but also the hyperscalers and all the AI firms, the big tech across global and driving that global demand. One analyst, Peter Kim from KB Financial Group, explains why.
You have to look at the customers of these semiconductor producers, hyperscalers and the LMM players. They're the ones that are buying their chips. If we see any signs of them possibly curbing their capex or even having some questions about the long-term business viability, then that's definitely a red flag. I guess the second part is that we have at the end of July, both Samsung and Hynix putting up their earnings. Micron just announced a few days ago with spectacular earnings. I guess the share price has already started to reflect those strong earnings coming up for Hynix and Samsung. They will have to beat that in order to have the next leg up. So there's two events we need to watch.
So we heard there from Peter. He said the message is pretty simple. Watch the customers and watch the earnings. If both remain strong, South Korea's AI momentum could continue. But if either starts to weaken, then markets may begin questioning how sustainable this boom really is. Investors were clearly digesting today's announcements. The mega project announcements helped bring a short reprieve to the country's equity market. The Kospi briefly bounced into positive territory, but it closed little change at 0.2% to the downside after falling nearly 4% earlier in the day. Now, the chip makers, too, trimmed some losses. Samsung Electronics, it fell around 5%, and SK Hynix briefly turned higher after the investment announcement, but ended the session off by almost 2%. On a year-to-date basis, the two tech titans clocked in steep gains, surpassing the wider Kospi. SK Hynix surging by almost 300% since the start of year, while Samsung yielding more than 150%. SK Hynix says it is exploring various financing options for its planned new chip facilities in South Korea, including partnerships with global companies with specific funding methods to be determined as investment plans progress. The South Korean memory chip maker said it may also consider investing outside South Korea, depending on market conditions and business feasibility. Well, that's all I have for now in business, but more to come later for you, Oteli, in the next segment.
Looking forward to that. Thanks for now, Olivia. Well, turning our attention to our next story, China has defended its latest export controls on Japanese organizations, saying that the measures are lawful and aimed at curbing what it calls Japan's growing militarization. Beijing has added 20 more Japanese entities to its export control list, restricting exports of dual-use goods that can have both civilian and military applications. Now, the organizations include defense-related research institutes and companies. China says the measures target only a limited number of entities and are not intended to disrupt broader economic and trade ties between the two countries.
我们要强调的是，中方此举完全正当、合理。合法，旨在坚决遏制日本新型军国主义妄动。我们希望日方迷途知返，纠正错误行径，真正反思并回到正确轨道。
Japan has condemned the move, demanding that the fresh measures be withdrawn and saying that it will take necessary actions. This is the latest escalation in a dispute that has intensified since comments by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi on Taiwan, with China having previously imposed similar export controls on Japanese entities. Now, China's trade chief is set to meet his European counterpart in Brussels today as the EU looks to address pressing trade issues. Well, China is the EU's second largest trade partner. The bloc's trade deficit hit more than $400 billion last year. And EU leaders have ordered its Trade Commission to negotiate with Beijing and prepare possible defensive measures to protect local industries. Well, planned moves include requiring companies to diversify the source of key supplies. The bloc is concerned that higher U.S. tariffs could also divert more Chinese goods to European shores, worsening a deficit already fueled by what Brussels say is Beijing's subsidies. Well, Chinese businesses are bracing for tougher regulations that could follow the meeting. Beijing, meanwhile, has warned that supply chains may become disconnected as key trade partners try to reduce trade imbalances. And for more, we're joined now by William Denslow, who is covering this story for CNA from Brussels. So, will these EU leaders, they appear to be rallying behind Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's tougher approach towards China, yet there is, I believe, interest to seek a negotiated solution to have Beijing address what's been perceived as this industrial overcapacity. So, Will, I guess the question is, how is that likely going to be playing out at the meetings?
It is a huge concern as far as EU officials are, and indeed member states across the bloc. You mentioned the importance of this relationship, and you mentioned the size of the trade surplus, which is growing. And you mentioned over $400 billion last year when it comes to that surplus. And according to estimates, that is on pace to be even 10% higher so far this year. The message we've been hearing consistently from EU officials is that while important as a trade relationship, vital, really, it's seen as unsustainable going forward. That is why European officials are hoping for a dual-track approach. The first is this seeking of dialogue, how to work with Beijing to try and find a negotiated solution, to try and ease these concerns about perceived trade imbalances, unfair trade practices as far as many in the EU are concerned. Of course, a charge that Beijing does refute. The other tact is to have more tools in its arsenal to be able to fight back, to defend European core interests. This could be towards providing more assurances for European businesses, the so-called made in Europe contingencies, things like potentially shutting out Chinese players in critical sectors such as telecoms, even introducing more quotas, more tariffs in the future. So really helping to bolster European defences as well.
So I hear what you're saying about this dual-track approach. And if the EU leaders do indeed back a tougher approach, what sort of measures could emerge? And how concerned are they about China's warnings on retaliation?
It is a huge concern, and not a consistent concern, though, across the European Union's 27 member states. There are some members that are certainly more vulnerable to potential ramifications from China than others. Looking at the likes of Spain, they have been seeking to forge closer ties with Beijing, more increased interconnectivity when it comes to trade partnerships. Madrid, certainly one of those nations that would like to see a dialogue prevail rather than more aggressive defensive tools used by the EU. Germany, another one to watch very closely indeed. How does Berlin feel about this fact, considering how vital China's market is for German autos going forward? So these member states are certainly concerned about any potential ramifications if this trade spat were to develop even further. But we have a bit of a sense of where member states are. There was a recent summit here in Brussels amongst the EU's member leaders in which they essentially instructed the European Commission to come up with some proposals for how to better protect European interests. So we're seeing more of an overarching trend across Europe that they feel that more needs to be done to address this trade imbalance with one of its key trading partners. Ateli?
Many thanks for that report, William Denslow, covering this story for CNA in Brussels. And still ahead on the bulletin, we're going to be unpacking the growing trade tensions on EU-China relations and what it means for the global economy when we speak with Professor Kerry Brown, Director at the Lao China Institute at King's College London. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, a key international organization warns that an AI downturn could develop into a sharper, faster crash than a traditional banking crisis. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. And as promised, it is now time to bring Olivia back into the fold. She's going to get us up to speed with the latest in business news. And Liv, as far as we know, investors are apparently rattled by another bout of AI-related volatility just last week. So tell us more, because with that sentiment still subdued, apparently there's a major international organization that's also sounding a note of caution.
Yeah, and you are referring to the Bank of International Settlements, or BIS, that says that AI funding is increasingly flowing through loosely regulated private credit channels. That's raising concerns about financial stability. As South Korea announces massive investments to anchor its next growth cycle, the Bank for International Settlements has issued fresh warnings over big tech's AI expenditure. And that comes amid mounting concerns about the scale and sustainability of borrowing that's fueling the current boom. Investment and projected productivity gains linked to artificial intelligence have stimulated the global economy, with tech giants raising hundreds of billions of dollars to fund their expansion plans. But the BIS has cautioned that if actual returns on investments fall short of expectations, investors could quickly pull back from financing and turn the boom into a bust, which could destabilize the global economy. We saw markets rattled by AI risks last week. Wall Street closed in the red on Friday after a tech sell-off triggered by Apple announcing price hikes over higher chip costs. And here in Asia, South Korea's Kospi saw price swings of up to 10% in one day as chip makers remain under pressure. The BIS, also known as the Central Bank for Central Banks, cautioned that pressures from rising public debt and inflation fueled by the Middle East crisis has added to market volatility. It has urged policymakers to act quickly and with discipline to mitigate the risk of economic instability. And the Chinese yuan is slightly firmer against the US dollar, hovering at levels around 6.794. The People's Bank of China injected 300 billion yuan, that's about 44 billion US dollars, into the financial system through the new overnight facility. It has also added 157.5 billion yuan through its existing 7-day reverse repos, leaving that benchmark rate unchanged at 1.4%. While the central bank did not publicly disclose the overnight borrowing rate, media reports say it was set at 1.25% below the 7-day rate. Analysts say that the move it is designed to give Beijing greater flexibility in managing short-term liquidity, particularly during periods of market volatility at month and quarter end. Now, the move brings China's monetary policy framework closer to those used by major central banks, including the US Fed, where overnight rates play a central role in guiding financial markets. China's manufacturing advantage has long been built on cost. But as supply chains become more uncertain, companies are looking to artificial intelligence in order to boost resilience, speed, and flexibility instead. Now, those technologies were front and center at this year's International Supply Chain Expo, which recently wrapped up in Beijing. CNA's Rebecca Mateo reports.
Walking around this year's new AI zone, one thing is hard to miss. Robots are everywhere. Some make coffee, others perform, keep people company, sort parcels, or even assist in hospitals. But beyond the robots themselves, companies here are racing to show how AI can be applied across real-world supply chain scenarios. One example is Chinese firm iFlyTech, best known for its AI models and speech recognition technology. The company is looking to move beyond the screen and move artificial intelligence into the physical world.
这样一款具身智能的机器人，就是集数据的采集、训练、推理于一体的，它可以克服机器人训练的数据不足的问题。目前，这款机器人已经应用在了像物流、 像智能制造这样一些场景里面。
The goal isn't simply smarter robots, it's smarter supply chains. Across the exhibition hall, companies are showing what that looks like in practice. Take this robot, for example. It can recognize the unique features of different products, such as their color or size, based on how it's programmed, and sort them accordingly. Now I've asked it to identify only the yellow cube. And there you go. The robotic arm can move at speeds of up to 1.5 meters per second. Now that's faster than a human worker. For the company, it also means operations can continue around the clock. As companies automate more of their operations, AI is increasingly connecting every stage of the supply chain.
让我们的这个整个的供应链更加的智慧，更加的这种可以前瞻性的预判，而不是说原来的这种比如说既定的这种锁死的这种供应链。我觉得这个是供应链的柔性和供应链的这个弹性会非常的提升。
But building smarter supply chains isn't just about adopting AI. Companies are also rethinking where they manufacture and operate. Rather than relying on exports alone, many are also expanding their overseas footprint. The company behind this AI-powered sorting system for products like pistachios has plans to expand from its current 9 overseas offices to 20 in the near future.
我们现在在5大洲都是有我们的子公司，欧洲有我们的西班牙公司也就澳洲有我们的澳大利亚公司。我们的本土化代表着我们的地缘政治的这种风险在不断的降低。
The technologies drew manufacturers, entrepreneurs, and investors looking for the next commercial applications for AI.
后续是不是可以跟中国的这些总代，然后我在下游的话，然后去承接一部分，然后去链接到中小企业。
我在找潜在的商机，就是看怎么样的应用场景，也兼做投资。
Analysts say that's part of a broader shift in how companies compete.
未来的话，我们讲这个成本优势只是其中的一个环节。 那么更多的话就是我们讲到一个是我们供应链这种生态的能力生态的协同，就是它的第一个安全、韧性要可控，是吧？这个供应链一定要有稳健。
As global supply chains become more fragmented, companies are increasingly betting that their next competitive edge will come not just from making products more cheaply, but from moving them more intelligently. Rebecca Mateo, CNA, Beijing.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, EU and Chinese trade chiefs are set to meet in Brussels at a time ties are under growing strain over trade, market access and geopolitical tensions. Well, we'll be speaking with this expert after the break to see if both sides can still find common ground. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea unveils a big tech push worth hundreds of billions of US dollars to sharpen its competitive edge in the fast-moving AI era, backed by domestic firms Samsung and SK Hynix. China adds 20 more Japanese entities to its export control list in a fresh move aimed at curbing what it says is Japan's pursuit of a new form of militarism. Plus, China's trade chief Wang Wentao's set to meet his European counterpart in Brussels, with the EU urgently looking to narrow its growing trade deficit with Beijing that has topped $400 billion last year. Brussels is also expected to push for fairer market access for European businesses and focus on a surge of low-cost Chinese exports into Europe. Now, to help us unpack the implications, we are joined now by Professor Kerry Brown, Professor of Chinese Studies and Director of the Lao China Institute at King's College London. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. First up, if you could set the scene for us, just how pivotal is today's meeting for the future of EU-China relations? I mean, would you go so far as to say it's like a make-or-break moment?
With the EU and China, it's always kind of a make-or-break moment. I mean, there's been many ups and downs in the last few years. I mean, the context of this meeting is recently Xi Jinping has hosted, the American president, the Russian president. He's been to North Korea. He's also hosted the Iranian foreign minister. I mean, it seems like Beijing is becoming the, diplomatic capital of the world. And so the EU is a big player. I mean, it's, kind of a major economic partner of China. It's a major export partner. It's also a technology partner. And so this is a very significant relationship. You talk of the G2, America and China, but really you could talk of Europe and China, and particularly the EU and China, as being, kind of the sort of like the pivotal three relations in the world. And so from that respect, of course, it's a very, very important visit, and it could be very consequential.
And I mean, this trade deficit, this number that, keeps coming up, $400 billion US. What sort of leverage do you think Brussels actually have in terms of trying to persuade Beijing to change its trade practices?
Well, remember, that's €1 billion a day. I mean, so this is very, very significant. The economies in Europe, major economies, are all going through headwinds. The German, French, Italian economies, they're kind of, they're growing, but there's constant worries about sustainability and, productivity. And China is an enormous kind of pressure. I mean, overproduction, kind of exporting into Europe, it's literally brought the German automotive, kind of industry to its knees. I mean, electronic vehicles, Europe is a big market. It's a big market for Chinese batteries. I mean, lithium batteries, it's very, very important. What leverage does Europe have? The leverage that it always had, which is market size and the wealth of that market. I suppose the extra dimension now is, of course, the United States is allied to it in some ways by wanting fairer trade practices. This is a long-standing battle. But of course, the problem for Europe is that America is politically very seemingly opposed to it at the moment. So you've got this era in which the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese are kind of at loggerheads with each other, even though in principle the Europeans and Americans, you would assume, would be more on each other's page because they have a similar problem with the deficits.
So how much of this then is really about Europe, and how much of it is a consequence of, U.S.-China tensions with higher U.S. tariffs pushing more Chinese exports into Europe?
Well, the assumption we could always make in the past was that broadly, for security, political and other reasons, Europe and America were aligned. I mean, they were sort of on the same page. But in the last year, we've seen, kind of the issue around Greenland. We've seen Trump's increased frustration with NATO. We've seen him put tariffs on European countries. So it's a very changed environment. What it means is that really Europe has to think much more about what it wants and what it needs. It needs to think more autonomously about this relationship. And it's not used to doing that because a large part of that was the assumption that America and it would be broadly aligned. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So this is the first time these two powers, Europe and China, have talked to each other in that new context substantially about sort of tangible things like trade. So the outcome will be very interesting. Does Europe defend its interests, or is it still going to try and kind of hedge and sit on the fence?
So what then would you consider a successful outcome for each side after these talks are done?
Well, ideally, market access for Europe. It signed or it agreed a common agreement on investment 7 or 8 years ago, but for political reasons that was never followed through. But really what it needs is to have, equal access to Chinese technology. Europe was a big technology transfer to China in the last 30 years. Now China is producing important technology that Europe needs back. And also openness of Chinese sectors, service sectors, finance sectors, the things that Europe's very strong with. And something about, the subsidies. It's a long-standing issue, but the subsidies that Chinese companies might have in then exporting into Europe. That really means talking about EV markets and what the Chinese and the Europeans can do in order to make this sustainable. Because at the moment, obviously for Europe, it is being particularly difficult for their automotive industry.
So, well, that is the best case scenario. But if, let's say, talks fail, and let's say if talks fail to rather narrow the differences, how do you think Beijing's response is going to be like?
Beijing has tried to decouple to some extent. Its largest trading partner now is ASEAN. It's not Europe or America. And so, I mean, it's kind of got a game plan, a plan B, as it were. Europe is still very, very important. But I think in terms of investment, in terms of a growing export market, I mean, it's no longer as important as it was. I mean, I think for Europe, though, the problem is that it really kind of needs China. It's got more of a dependency. It kind of talks about wanting to decouple, but it doesn't really have anywhere else with the same kind of scale. There is only one China with this scale, not India, not Africa, not Latin America. It's really important to continue having at least something. We're going through a big transition. Technology is a game changer. Europe hasn't really worked out what to do about getting access to Chinese technology, but there are lots of areas in which we are more common. We're more on agreement with Europe, China than we are with America on how to combat climate change. That's a big one. And on the issues around AI. So in those areas, we kind of have agreements that we can achieve more easily than maybe with the United States.
All right, many thanks for your insights. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Kerry Brown, Professor of Chinese Studies and Director of the Lao China Institute at King's College London. Well, meantime, China has accused Australia of playing geopolitical games after Canberra signed a sweeping security and economic agreement with Vanuatu that prevents any foreign military base from being established in the Pacific island nation. Well, the pact comes as Australia and China compete for influence across the Pacific. Now, Beijing says that the agreement should not come at the expense of broader regional cooperation and opposes efforts to use Pacific partnerships to advance strategic competition.
中方始终秉持相互尊重、平等相待、互利共赢、开放包容的原则，同包括瓦努阿图在内的太平洋岛国开展各领域的务实合作。我们希望有关国家同太平洋岛国开展合作，真正有利于岛国地区的发展和稳定，不应该针对第三方，更不应借此搞地缘博弈。
Prime Ministers Anthony Albanese and Jotam Napat signed the Nakamal Agreement in Canberra after months of negotiations. Under the deal, Vanuatu will consult Australia on third-party involvement in critical infrastructure and prioritise policing cooperation with Pacific Islands foreign members. And it also includes economic support, although financial details have not been disclosed.
This is an agreement that recognises sovereignty, so we respect the right of all nations to make sovereign decisions about their engagement with other countries. But what this does do is to provide certainty for Australia that there will be no foreign military base, that we will prioritise policing cooperation with Pacific Island Forum members, something that we've asked for across the board, and that there'll be any consultation on any third-party engagements in critical infrastructure, and that critical infrastructure will be free from militarisation or foreign interference.
Well, Canberra has previously committed 500 million Australian dollars over 10 years under the partnership. Now, the agreement was originally due to be signed last September, but that was delayed after Vanuatu raised concerns it could limit its ability to seek infrastructure funding from other countries. Shifting gears now, Vietnam has officially unveiled a 100-year vision and master plan for Hanoi as it steps up efforts to attract investment and deepen partnerships with the private sector. The $2.5 trillion blueprint covers major infrastructure and transport projects, also investing in healthcare, elderly care and smart technologies to support the capital's long-term growth. CNA's senior correspondent Young Wai Kit with this report.
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then this performance is telling the story of the future of Hanoi over the next 100 years. This opening act set the stage for the city's futuristic vision at an event aimed at attracting investments. Potential investors can also tap on a newly launched digital platform where they can access and visualize data such as the city's maps. The ultimate vision: Hanoi will better manage urban density, land use and infrastructure with a long-term population target of no more than 20 million people. That would be almost double the city's current population. To tackle congestion, the authorities plan to expand connectivity, including introducing air taxis. The authorities will also work with surrounding provinces, which will focus on areas like developing healthcare hubs, integrated industrial services, and commercial urban clusters. The 100-year plan will be rolled out in phases. Science and technology, together with digital transformation, will be key drivers, while investors' expertise will also play a role.
Trong các cái điều khoản được ký trong MOU thì đều có điều khoản chuyển giao công nghệ. Có nghĩa là chúng ta sẽ phải, các tập đoàn đó đầu tư tại Việt Nam thì có một điều khoản chuyển giao công nghệ cho phía Việt Nam, và như vậy chúng ta sẽ tạo được một cái môi trường sinh thái phù hợp để chúng ta nội địa hóa được các sản phẩm mà trước đây chỉ có nước ngoài có thể làm được.
Đối từ góc độ doanh nghiệp thì nếu chúng ta xác định công nghiệp AI bán dẫn hay là đổi mới sáng tạo là động lực tăng trưởng mới thì chúng tôi nhận thấy là câu chuyện về hạ tầng không khác gì câu chuyện về đường cao tốc 20 năm về trước, thì hạ tầng luôn sẽ phải đi trước. Đấy, điều kiện thứ hai đó là chính quyền sẽ đúng ra làm điều phối cuộc chơi này, thì Hà Nội đang làm tốt vai trò của mình.
To prepare for these ambitious plans, President Tô Lâm has pushed to slash red tape, making it easier for global firms to invest. The government is also prioritizing infrastructure developments to ensure the city's master plan can be achieved.
Thứ nhất là về vấn đề về các hệ thống quy hoạch hạ tầng kỹ thuật. Trước đây chúng ta nghiên cứu trong cỡ khoảng 2-3 năm, thì cho đến thời điểm hiện nay để cụ thể hóa bản quy hoạch này thì thành phố, thành ủy cũng đã chỉ đạo để chúng tôi triển khai ngay trong giai đoạn tháng 9 năm 2026 này.
To fund Hanoi's 100-year vision and its master plan, the government is planning to beef up investments as well as public-private partnerships. In the short run, the government has set aside an annual growth target of at least 10%. By 2045, Vietnam aims to be a high-income country. And in about 40 years' time, that's 2065, Hanoi aims to be among the top global cities and also top 10 happiest capital cities in the world. Leung Wai Kit, CNA, Hanoi.
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, a look at how Japanese scientists and divers in Okinawa are tracking one of the giants of the sea. China says that it will be sending emergency supplies worth $14 million to quick hit Venezuela, aimed at supporting relief and rebuilding efforts. This comes as rescue teams race against time after Wednesday's devastating earthquakes killed at least 1,450 people. 8 Chinese nationals were among the dead.
在委内瑞拉的中资企业和华侨社团纷纷自发向委方提供救援工作急需的工程机械和医疗物资，并组建救援队，积极参与搜救工作。中方愿根据委内瑞拉灾情发展，继续向委方提供更多支持。
Well, locals are frustrated by the government's response, which they say is inadequate. Some say there's not enough help on the ground and that full searches of dozens of collapsed sites have yet to start. Families waiting for news of loved ones have even joined the rescue efforts themselves, digging through rubble with shovels, drills, and their bare hands. The quakes, which struck on Wednesday, left more than 700 buildings badly damaged. Officials say search teams are now concentrating on specific locations to help narrow the search. Okinawa is one of Japan's best diving destinations to see a giant of the sea, the manta ray. Now, despite their size, researchers still do not know where many of them go once they disappear from view. Now a team of scientists and local divers are taking a deep dive to find out.
The waters around Okinawa are home to one of the world's most recognizable marine species. But despite decades of people diving to see the manta rays, many questions about their habits remain unanswered. To find out, researchers from the Japan Manta project are working alongside local dive operators to tag wild mantas to track their movements. The work is centered around Ishigaki Island, part of Okinawa's Yaeyama chain. The area is famous for its year-round population of reef manta rays. More than 300 individual reef mantas have already been identified through long-term photo studies. Project lead and marine researcher Rika Ozaki says scientists still do not know whether these animals stay close to home or range far afield.
What we're trying to understand is how are they using the environment here? Are they very locally restricted, or are they quite a transient population? What we also don't know is how is the population doing? Like, what are the threats that they're facing? If there are threats, and is the population actually doing well, or is it actually in a really bad state? Like, these things are things that we don't even have a grasp on.
Ms. Ozaki's team is deploying satellite and GPS tags to help their research. They hope to see where the manta travels, how deep they dive, and whether their movements change with the seasons. The technology is opening a window into parts of the animals' lives that divers never see.
Tagging is a huge tool that we use in our research at the moment, because mantas are known to dive very deep. And so if we were just relying on observational, humans we cannot go to, for example, 200 meters, 300 meters, etc. And so tagging is really this incredible tool that we use in order to, catch a glimpse into the life that they lead outside of being at a cleaning station or in observable range.
Around Ishigaki, reef mantas are often seen gathering at coral reef cleaning stations. This is where small fish cluster to remove parasites and dead skin from other marine life. But researchers believe mantas spend much of their lives beyond such areas, moving into deeper waters to feed. Getting tags onto the animals require careful planning. A dive guide explains the process.
でルールとしてはダイバーがいない時にやりましょうね。他の一般のダイバーさんやっぱつけると衝撃で一瞬違うところに行っちゃったりするんで、他のダイバーさんに迷惑かかるので、誰もいなかったらつけようっていうルールのもと潜ったんですけど、タイミングよく誰もいなくて、もうその1本目で4個体につけれたので GPS は。
Early findings are already revealing differences between manta species. Researchers say reef mantas appear to stay relatively close to local islands. Oceanic mantas, meanwhile, travel much farther and dive much deeper. One tagged manta reached a depth of more than 1,000 meters. For Ms. Ozaki and her team, the goal is not just to map movements. The data could help identify critical habitats and guide future conservation efforts. That may become increasingly important as warming seas, reef degradation, and tourism place growing pressure on Okinawa's marine environment. And by understanding where manta rays go today, researchers hope to better protect where they will be tomorrow.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has called for the country's sports ministry to investigate the national team's early exit at the group stage of the FIFA World Cup. The Taeguk Warriors failed to progress to the knockouts, losing 1-0 in back-to-back matches against co-hosts Mexico and South Africa to sit third in Group A, finishing outside of the 8 best third-placed teams, advancing to the round of 32. Well, Mr. Lee apologized for what he called an unacceptable outcome and was scathing in a lengthy post on social media. He blamed the team's exit on organizational and personnel failures, loyalty and factionism, and blasted head coach Hong Myung-bo, calling the leadership of the team incompetent. Hong has since resigned a day after his side's exit from the tournament was confirmed. The deeply unpopular reappointment of the 57-year-old former captain in 2024 had led to initial allegations of favoritism from the Korean media. Social media posts showing shops with signs banning Hong from the premises have gone viral in South Korea, while the country's own national broadcaster pixelated him in his press conference following the defeat to South Africa. Well, as South Korea heads home, Japan's World Cup journey reaches its defining moment. It will face its biggest test in just a few hours, taking on five-time champions Brazil, tracing a place in the last 16. Japan heads into the match unbeaten after finishing second in its group with a win and 2 draws. Coach Hajime Moriyasu says that his squad is united and believes that it can spring another upset despite missing injured winger Takefuso Kubo. Now, if the match goes the distance, he says it will decide the order of penalty takers himself, hoping to avoid a repeat of Japan's heartbreaking shootout exit at the last World Cup.
評価が高い、ブラジルと、そうでない日本が、っていうのはごくごく当たり前のことかなと思っています。で、我々もワールドカップでチャンピオンを目指すということで、今レベルアップをしてますし、実際ワールドカップにも挑んでます。
Japan stunned Brazil 3-2 in a friendly last October. A result the South Americans have not forgotten. Brazil captain Marquinhos says that his side has grown stronger since that defeat, while coach Carlo Ancelotti has warned his players to expect a difficult test against one of the world's best teams.
But I'm very hopeful that we are going to win. I don't think it's going to be a match that's going to be 3-0, maybe 1-0. I'll bet on 1-0, but I'm very excited and I think we're going to move forward.
Right now, Brazil is not as strong as like before, so I'm expecting maybe we can have a little chance to win tomorrow.
And that wraps up this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can find us on all our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Now, if you're watching us in Singapore, do stay on as we bring highlights from the first ever round of 32 match at the FIFA World Cup next. Thanks for watching.
Let's kick things off at the entertainment capital of the world. Canada and South Africa not disappointing in the first game of the last 32 knockout round in Los Angeles. In the only match of the day, Canada, the first World Cup hosts to play a match outside of their own country, had the better of the chances in the first half. South Africa saved by some desperate defending just before the break. Now, both teams were playing a World Cup knockout match for the first time, but the Canadians were much bolder in possession. Their constant threat on the break, forcing Bafana on the back foot. And after 92 minutes of play, the Canucks finally broke through the South African defense. Canada captain Steven Estacio at the center of so many of his team's attacks, finishing off their last of the game with a firm shot from out of the box off a South African clearance. Now, the Canucks held on till full time to send the largely Canadian supporting crowd absolutely wild, becoming the first team to the round of 16. That's the furthest that this country has ever reached at a World Cup, and ending South Africa's run at the tournament. The Canadians will take on either the Netherlands or Morocco next in Houston. And some big fixtures ahead on the second day of the round of 32 that we can look forward to. Now, Japan, one of the only 2 Asian Confederation teams left in the tournament, take on the 5-time champions Brazil. And 4-time winners Germany play Paraguay next. The Netherlands, meantime, face the dark horses Morocco.